The courtroom was full. Reporters, lawyers, and everyday people sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on the front. It wasn't quiet, exactly, but there was a kind of thick silence, the kind you feel more than hear. Everyone knew something big was about to happen, but no one could have guessed how far it would go. At the center of it all sat Judge Andrew H. Stones, one of the most powerful federal judges in Texas. And just a few feet away stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a young lawmaker with a folder full of facts and something to prove. When Judge Stones laughed at her in front of the entire courtroom, people gasped. But Crockett didn't blink. And that's where it all started. This wasn't just another case on the calendar. This courtroom didn't feel like a place where lawyers argue quietly and the judge gives out orders. It felt like a storm was coming. News cameras were waiting outside. Reporters were live-tweeting inside. Every seat was taken. Even people who had never cared about court cases before were following this one. Everyone could tell something different was about to happen. It wasn't just a legal hearing. It felt more like a showdown, one that had been building for years. Judge Andrew H. Stones had sat on the bench for more than 2 decades. He was the kind of judge lawyers didn't argue with, the kind who thought the courtroom belonged to him, not the people. His nickname in legal circles, the Gavel King, because when he spoke, everyone else stopped. He had a record of shutting down civil rights cases, calling them wastes of time or media plays. He didn't hide his opinions, especially when it came to voting rights. And for 20 years, nobody had dared to push back. Not really. Then came Jasmine Crockett. At just 33 years old, Crockett was not your average politician. Before being elected to Congress, she had worked as a civil rights attorney. She wasn't from a rich background. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, fought her way through law school, and spent years defending people who couldn't afford justice. She knew what injustice looked like, and she recognized it the moment she walked into Judge Stones's courtroom. The case that brought them together was about voter suppression in Texas. Thousands of people, mostly from Black and Latino neighborhoods, had faced blocked access to polls, closed voting centers, and unexplained ballot issues. Crockett wasn't just there as a congresswoman. She had helped gather the evidence. She had met the voters. This case mattered to her in a way that was personal and deep, and for Judge Stones, it was just another file on his desk. 2 people from 2 different worlds were now facing off. One believed power was something you protect. The other believed power was something you hold accountable. And when Judge Stones laughed in Crockett's face, thinking it was all a game, she calmly reached for her briefcase. That's when everything changed. The hearing started, like most others, formal, quiet, stiff. But something felt off almost immediately, as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood to speak. Judge Andrew H. Stones interrupted her before she could even finish introducing herself. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, dragging out the wrong name like it was a joke. She gently corrected him. He ignored it. It happened again. And again. Each time, the mistake felt less like an accident and more like a message. He wasn't taking her seriously. As she began presenting her opening statement, Stones leaned back in his chair and let the defense attorneys speak over her. When she tried to respond, he cut her off. When she asked to clarify points, he told her to get to the point. He rolled his eyes when she cited cases. When the defense made long, winding arguments, he nodded along. When Crockett brought up data and legal precedent, he called it political dressing. The message was clear. She wasn't welcome here. Not as a congresswoman, not as a lawyer, and definitely not as someone trying to challenge his courtroom. Then came the first major test. Crockett pulled out video footage showing people being turned away at polling places. She explained the videos were taken from 3 different counties and clearly showed poll workers telling eligible voters they couldn't vote. "We believe this is direct evidence of suppression," she said. One of the defense lawyers immediately jumped up, "Objection. Prejudicial and inflammatory." Without even glancing at the screen, Judge Stones nodded. "Sustained. Move on." Crockett's face didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly on the podium. She kept her voice calm and respectful. "Your Honor, these videos show clear violations of voting law. They are central to the case." Stones didn't budge. "Not in this courtroom. You want to play videos? Try YouTube." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Even the defense lawyers looked unsure for a second. But Stones just stared her down. She didn't yell. She didn't panic. She moved on to legal statistics, maps, reports, evidence showing how polling places had been shut down in mostly Black and Latino areas. She quoted numbers and legal precedent. Stones called it theory. She mentioned 2 cases that had set a standard for discrimination claims. He called it creative lawyering. Every move she made, he shut down. Every piece of evidence, every careful argument, he brushed aside like it was a campaign speech, not a legal case. Then came the moment that changed everything. Crockett stood tall and announced that she was about to introduce key footage of voters being turned away. She raised the tablet and looked toward the judge. Stones stared at her, then let out a laugh. A real one. Not a cough or a chuckle, a loud, almost mocking laugh that echoed across the courtroom. People turned in their seats. Some gasped. Others froze. "Congresswoman," he said, still smiling, "save that for your campaign ads. This is a courtroom. We deal in facts, not phone, footage, and drama." The air in the room shifted. Everything felt suddenly heavier. Crockett didn't move. Right away, she looked at him, not angry, not shaken, but like someone quietly drawing a line. Her eyes didn't leave his. She slowly lowered the tablet, placed it back on the table, and reached into her briefcase. She didn't shout. She didn't throw anything or storm out. She didn't need to. Because what she pulled out next wasn't just another file. It was something that would shift the power in the room completely. At that exact moment, the courtroom didn't feel like a place where the judge held all the power anymore. It felt like something was coming. Like everything Judge Stones had done to push her down had only made her more certain, more focused. Her silence was louder than his laughter, and the folder she pulled from her briefcase would turn that laughter into regret. Up until now, the judge had made the rules. He had spoken over her, ignored her facts, and dismissed her role. But now, something had changed. Not in his mind, but in hers. Crockett had been disrespected, cut off, laughed at, and told that her work didn't belong in a court of law. But she didn't fold. She just reached down, pulled out what she had been preparing for months, and set it gently on the table. The way she moved said it all. She was ready. Jasmine Crockett stood still, folder in hand, while Judge Stones leaned back with a smug expression, tapping his pen like the outcome was already decided. She took a quiet breath, then looked up and said, clearly and calmly, "Your Honor, before we proceed, I believe there are some procedural matters the court needs to consider." Stones barely lifted his eyes. "Not necessary," he said, waving her off. "Let's move on." But she didn't. Without raising her voice, without asking again, Crockett opened the thick folder in front of her. The cover was simple, but the title printed across the front carried weight. Judicial Patterns, a 5-year review. The room fell still. Even the defense team leaned forward slightly. Crockett pulled out the first document, placed it on the table, and began, "Let's start with Morrison v. Texas, a 2023 case involving voter suppression claims, nearly identical to the ones in this case." She lifted a page and read from the transcript. "In that case, Your Honor dismissed all evidence before it was even fully presented. According to your comments, and I quote, 'There's no need to hear fairy tales from people who lose elections.'" The judge blinked, sat up straighter. His hands twitched near the gavel. But Crockett was only getting started. She laid out the second document, then a third. "Henderson v. Texas Board of Elections dismissed. You sanctioned the attorneys for filing what you called a media stunt. That decision was reversed on appeal. Then another, Jackson v. Harris County. You told the plaintiff's lawyer to stop wasting everyone's time with conspiracy theories. Also reversed on appeal. Case after case hit the table. 12 in total. 12 civil rights lawsuits dismissed or mocked. 12 decisions overturned. 12 moments where this judge had used his power to shut down real complaints from real people. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let the documents speak for themselves. She read directly from transcripts, real words, spoken by Judge Stones inside this very courtroom. "These people need to stop complaining about every little rule," he had said in one case. "Maybe stick to personal injury and leave the Constitution to someone else." In another, you could hear the shifting in the gallery seats. Reporters were writing furiously. The courtroom clerk had stopped typing. Even the defense attorneys sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Stones clutched his gavel tightly. His knuckles were white. His confident posture had slipped. His face was no longer commit, was pale, drawn. Every quote, every document made the walls close in a little more. Crockett, still standing tall, moved toward the final document. "And then we have Davis v. Texas Attorney General, filed in 2021, she said, sliding a page across the table. "This one is different, because your actions in that case were already flagged for review. She turned the page slowly. The transcript shows that, during open court, you told the plaintiff's attorneys, "These people need to learn to follow the law like everyone else." The room was completely still, not even the sound of a cough or paper rustle. Everyone in the courtroom understood what these people meant. No one had forgotten. But what Crockett said next turned that memory into something even heavier. That case was referred to the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee, she continued, while the investigation was eventually closed, without a clear outcome. I believe that with the new information I've presented here today, there's strong reason to reopen that case. You could see it on the judge's face, he knew it. Too. His power, his name, his courtroom, all of it was slipping out of his hands. He looked like a man trying to grip sand. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. She stepped back slightly, letting her words hang in the silence. Then, clearly, calmly, and with complete control, she said, "Your Honor, I move that this court recuse itself from this case, due to demonstrated bias against civil rights plaintiffs. I further request that this case be reassigned to a judge who has not shown a repeated pattern of dismissing similar claims without proper consideration." She paused, then added, "Because justice doesn't work when bias stands in the way." In that moment, there was no sound. Just the clicking of pens, the quiet press of camera shutters. A room full of people realizing they had just witnessed something they might never see again. The judge who had ruled over thousands of cases with full confidence shaken. A 33-year-old Congresswoman, holding nothing but paper and truth, had just shifted the weight of the entire courtroom. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply laid down the truth, piece by piece. And as the last document rested on the table, and her motion echoed through the courtroom, no one, especially not Judge Stones, could pretend things would go back to the way they were. The courtroom didn't resume that day. After Jasmine Crockett finished her motion, and silence filled the room, Judge Andrew H. Stones sat frozen for a moment, then finally reached for his gavel. His voice was low, almost shaky. "Court is in recess. We'll continue tomorrow." But everyone in the room knew there wouldn't be a tomorrow, not with him on the bench. He stood up slowly, looking pale and distant, and walked out through the side door without another word. Before the hour was over, word had spread. Judge Stones had stepped back from the case, citing health concerns. Outside the courthouse, the real storm began. Someone from the gallery had recorded part of the courtroom showdown on their phone. Within minutes, it hit Twitter. Then, TikTok. The moment where Crockett laid down her final quote about bias and justice was clipped, reposted, and overlaid. With dramatic music, she shut down a judge. The captions read, "With nothing but receipts." Legal analysts and news anchors started replaying the footage over and over. Hashtags like #Crockett vs Stones and #Judicial Bias started trending. The documents she presented were soon uploaded and shared online, page by page. People began digging deeper. By the next day, civil rights groups had joined in. Lawyers who had once stayed quiet about Judge Stones began speaking out. The ACLU released a public statement calling for a full review of his cases. The American Bar Association echoed the concern. Longtime court reporters began publishing old quotes from Stones, highlighting years of disrespect and dismissals in civil rights hearings. The Dallas Morning News ran a timeline of his most controversial rulings. It wasn't just one moment anymore. It had become a movement. The pressure worked. Within a week, the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee officially reopened their investigation into Stones. 3 of the 12 cases Crockett had referenced filed motions to reopen, citing bias and misconduct. Suddenly, the cases he once tossed aside were being looked at with new eyes. 6 months later, Judge Stones quietly announced his retirement. No press conference, no farewell speech. Just a typed statement saying he was stepping down to focus on his health and family. But everyone knew why. While he faded into the background, Crockett's name only grew louder. Her calm, focused takedown became something of a legend in legal circles. Law schools invited her to speak. Advocacy groups called her a model for courtroom courage. Even legal experts on opposite sides of the political spectrum admitted she had done something rare. She had exposed a broken part of the system and done it using the law itself. The videos of her performance were studied. In classrooms, students wrote essays on how she used facts instead of emotion, order instead of chaos. Before long, her methods had a name: the Crockett Protocol. Legal reform advocates began using it as a model, gathering detailed records on judges, identifying patterns, and presenting them in court. New rules were proposed for transparency in federal courts. Some passed. Others were still being debated, but the conversation had changed. Crockett had opened a door that wouldn't close again, and it all started with a single folder, a single hearing, a judge who laughed, woman who didn't back down. What Jasmine Crockett did in that courtroom wasn't just about winning one case. It was about showing that the law, when used right, could still speak truth to power. It was about proving that no one, not even a federal judge, is beyond accountability. And it was about reminding people everywhere that one person, fully prepared and unafraid, can change the way the system works. One woman, one folder, one moment that changed the American courtroom forever.